So good morning. This is a session in which we're attempting to stimulate some input from all of you about InCommon futures. The three of us on the podium are from the Community Trust and Assurance Board of Internet 2's InCommon. Albert Wu works with Internet 2. John Miner, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and my name's David Bantz from University of Alaska, and I chair that group this year. So we got a fancy setup here. Let's see if I can make this work. So about the session, there is a QR code there that should take you if you want to actually contribute notes. Well, I said we would be taking notes, and we will. There's a Google Doc, and we'll have that up on the screen when we get to a more interactive portion. Questions about that? Let's start in. So I'm an educator and humanist before I'm a technologist, so I like a little bit of a historical perspective. And recognizing that this is the 20th anniversary of InCommon, 20 years before that, 1984, introduction of the Mac, and where I was working at the time, big campaign to see if we can get the modem pool up to 1,200 baud. So it's all about making one-to-one connections at that point. And by the time of 2004, it's not so much about connecting, though that continues to be an issue. It's about converting everything to digital. Books, of course, journals, workflows, your DNA, everything has a digital representation. Where are we now in 2024 going forward? Seems like an era of creation. Let's see if I can make this thing run. So this is the Sora video. A text prompt simply says a young man in his 20s sitting on a cloud reading a book. And from that one sentence, Sora generated this video, which a little bit small on the screen, but if you look at it, if you've seen it online, it's pretty damn convincing. So let's see. Next. So I think in the Connect era, 1984, it was kind of lonely. A lot of us talking to one another. That's the saloon in Esther, Alaska, near where I live. When we were doing the conversion of everything in 24, you got to talk to everybody, right? We're talking to librarians and biologists, and many IT departments have got specialists going out and meeting everybody to address their needs. Where are we now? Well, I feel we're sort of like the detectives in True Detectives in Alaska, when where in the H are we going? And so it's an exciting time, perhaps a dangerous time as well. But this is our opportunity to try to define where we would like to go in terms of research and education communities and have technology serve our needs rather than be slaves to it. I like this slide from Kevin's presentation yesterday on the InCommon Futures Report. If we set a goal, we're going to have to, over the next several years, make some course corrections to get to where we want to go as opposed to where we would drift if we don't take decisive actions. So anything's okay for input on how InCommon could better meet your institutional needs, meet your institutional mission and goals, but we've got some prompts here, 5 different questions, starting with, I'm going to shift the screen around here. Sorry.
No, just I need to see my mouse cursor.
There we go. All right, there's the Google Doc being displayed. Any questions on the left. You're welcome to open anything you got and put comments in. John, are you going to take some notes?
I will be working on it.
Okay. So I can no longer.
If you click back into the
Oh,
slides,
sorry.
maybe. Here, I'll give you the browser back.
Okay. So the first question is about people. Who are your stakeholders, and how in the world are you going to keep track of them? You know, it's not just students and faculty, and I know when we've talked to a number of vendors that want to assist us in some way in managing identities, the diversity, the multiplicity, and the rapid change of people from one role to another is something that is not often acknowledged or accommodated by a lot of tools available. We've already seen a lot of discussion about brain drain, difficult to get IAM or indeed almost any technology positions filled, and how are you going to address urgent technological needs when you have trouble hiring people, through folks retire, get better offers, et cetera.
So just a bit of
Go ahead.
sort of from a format thing.
We're
We
gonna
were
come
not
back.
expecting this huge room. We were expecting a much smaller, more intimate room for discussions. So we're going to try to make this work. I'm going to run mics to you rather than making you get up. So just raise your hand, I'll come to you. Or you can just get up to the wall mic as well. Right? This is meant to be a discussion, so speak up. Otherwise, it's going to be a really boring session.
Yep. So we know there are a lot of commercial needs and commercial services that we all want to make use of, but there's also the research and education cloud. This is a slide from Kevin's presentation yesterday. Research and education institutions have to deal both with this commercial cloud of offerings as well as research and education offerings. And while there's a little bit of overlap, they're basically two very different environments, but your faculty and students want both, need both, and so how do you serve those? I know I am bombarded, I'm sure everybody else is, with magical solutions that will take care of all of my security and identity problems if only I buy a subscription to or buy into X, whatever X is. And they're not all completely true claims. And I think I have difficulty, and I'm sure many of my colleagues have difficulty in navigating through those claims to identify what makes sense for my institution's capabilities, its most pressing needs, and its particular mission. Whatever we deploy is going to be a bit of a grab bag, a mix and match, but that all has to work seamlessly together because we expect, or rather the faculty and our students expect, to be able to have a simple interface to exactly what they want, when they want, and it's our job to make that work together behind the scenes. How can we facilitate that? So I'll go back to the summary
It's also on the next
here,
slide.
and it's open mic.
Thank you.
Bar.
So, forget whose presentation I saw this in, so this is not original work, but one of the things that always comes to my mind is, 20 years ago, we didn't have tools. We had to build the tools. We didn't have protocols. We had to build the protocols. We didn't have schemas. We had to build the schemas. Now we have all of that, right? There's also been a Cambrian explosion in terms of tools. I mean, this is literally the slide you were just on. We have so many tools now that all purport to do one thing or another. Some of them actually deliver on that, right? Some of them try to get close, right? But it's the landscape has gotten very different. So how do we as a community, which that's a loaded word, community, because inside of it are individual institutions, but inside of it is also us in a collective, which in many cases is represented by internet too, but not in all cases. So how do we as a community thrive in a world that is definitely very different from what it was on InCommon's 0th birthday, right? A lot of course corrections are going to be needed, and I think we're going to have to move higher in the conceptual stack of, and you know, I don't really speak Gartnerese. Like on a lucky day, I can understand it, and there's some good insights there, but I don't know how to speak that lingo. But we need to move up in the value stack of, you know, out of the tools and solutions and closer to policy guidance, closer to curation, closer to digesting that stuff and putting this identity practice. Tom Jordan's often referenced slides, which I have unfortunately not seen, but I've heard invoked so many times, right? Identity management is a practice. And our body of knowledge and our body of guidance needs to really operate at that level.
Anybody? Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the crux of the discussion today, and the Futures 2 report and the other changes we're looking at. And hopefully what we can work on in here as David or Albert noted, this is not exactly the room configuration we anticipated. We were thinking more like an A-camp session, which is traditionally, I believe, has blinding lights and a stage. So, yeah, obviously, you know, the open notes document, you know, if we had a whiteboard or a flip chart, it would be very useful for that purpose. But ideas on how we get there, there's no wrong answers. We want to get everything scribbled down, how we can change to meet the new needs.
You know, as Gabor's talking, I'm thinking that, like, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? You know, 10 years ago, the community needed help figuring out, like, how to configure an attribute resolver, or how to configure a grouper workflow and things like that. But in the end, they were trying to figure out how to provide particular services or competencies within their IM program. And that doesn't change. We need to continue to do that in the future. We just need to understand that the technologies are shifting, and we need to come back to that kind of like functional anchor to be able to say that this generation of providing those services looks different, and we might have more options, but we still have the need as a community to connect to one another, understand the strategies that are being used, understand where they're successful in our environments and where they're not. And so I think, you know, when we contemplate this future that is a lot less code writing and maybe a lot more like contract writing, we need to understand how we don't lose the spirit of community and collaboration and collective problem solving that I think maybe makes InCommon's place in the community even more important than it was in the past, rather than less.
So, Tom, if we embrace that notion that we want to rely on community to effectively expand so that our base of support is really broader than our local institution, what are some tactics to make that real?
I think, you know, some of the things that we do that's maybe unique among the community is really connecting across not just the administrative or utility computing, but into the academic and research computing, and connecting all of those things together to tell a story that no one else is telling the institutions.
What's that story?
Well, it's that, like, you know, commercial offerings, the packaged software that we get from vendors takes us, what, 70%, 80%, maybe 90% of the way there. And there's a way to do the remaining 30, 20, 10%, but you're not going to hear it from anybody that has sales in their title. And so that's where we need to, as a community, be able to connect people with solutions, whether it is working groups, special focused projects or things like that. But that, like, power, that unique power that Internet 2 and InCommon have to convene the community around particular problems and identify solutions takes lots of different forms. And it might take different forms for the different problems that we're solving. But like that, the answer lies somewhere in there, I think.
Thanks.
A, B, C. Okay. There's also many hats to the idealized community group here, right? They need not even be part of the same legal entity, right? But the idealized community group is one that can fulfill the diversity of roles that is noted on that executive infographic page of the Futures 2 report, right? The couple different roles, including the providing of services, where that group is acting more like a vendor partner, but also the training in the community, where it's acting more like a collection of peers, industry organization. But then there's also the working with providers of other offerings to raise awareness about the particular set of needs that this community has, which looks a lot more like a pretty typical, industry interest group, right? But then there's also the element of policy and potentially compliance, which looks to be more of a standard setting or like a quasi-regulatory, self-regulatory organization, right? And whatever pieces are in place, they need to be able to wear these hats comfortably. These are all pieces we need, right? We need to really work hard on imagining what a structure could be that can provide all of these pretty diverse functionalities and provide them well. One of the things that that I find extremely valuable is the Net Plus initiative. The Net Plus initiative is a very fortunate melding of a couple different facets of that. There's aspects of vendor management in there. There's aspects of raising awareness about our requirements. There's aspect of putting us in touch with vendor partners and have that dialogue going. There's aspects of business models. There's a lot of thought and care that was put into that program that I think is very, very successful, I would venture to guess. Those are the types of innovative solutions that I think we need to keep in our heads. They need to become a part of the palette, a first-class part of the palette of the set of offerings that we really give.
So that is an interesting question. Are we a special interest group? I mean, I think we are, but I think we're more than that. Are we a buying club, if you look at Net Plus that way? Probably more than that.
I have a question. Does everybody here know what Net Plus is? Okay. All right. So what do you all think?
I'm curious, there are actually people in the room that I don't know, so yeah, and who have other thoughts, love it.
I can just be filler here, but I'm Paul Erickson with Moran. There's been a lot of talk about, you know, what the community needs to do, and, you know, how the landscape has changed. You know, there's things that we don't need to write anymore. There's things that we don't need to build internally or host internally anymore. And in a lot of cases, schools are still staffed out for that world of 20 years ago. You know, they've got the coders and they've got the, you know, the engineers, and it's been cool to watch some of the schools start to rebuild their skill sets and reorganize and, you know, take a new look at what's important in this current context. And I think there's an element of that where, you know, we need to look externally. We need to look at, you know, the different communities that are important to us, but also take a look internally and say, okay, what are we doing around program management and better engagement with the campus? And, you know, people have the skills to deal with contract and procurement, and making sure that there's remedies in whatever contract we're signing, or, you know, whatever's important to us, and have those discussions about risk and our risk posture, and, you know, where we need to be internally, and then engage with the other schools and with the community to develop those best practices and make it more consumable and more scalable. But yeah, I think that internal component, and just having support groups around that internal component, is going to be a really important part of moving forward together.
I like thinking of us as a support group. That's a yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is, of course, something I would say about this event, or TechX, and it's getting together and realizing we're not alone having this problem. It's a great benefit.
I'm going to move to this side of the room, and I see faces I don't recognize. Presumably, you might be new to this conversation. What do y'all think? Does this ring any bell? Well, I should actually ask, is everybody here in the IAM or information security discipline? Yes. Show of hand, who is not? Oh, okay. We have quite a
Okay,
few folks.
those
What
are
can we
the
do for
people
you?
we need to hear
Yeah.
from.
It's okay.
So I think we jumped quite a bit immediately into the deep end. Does any of this resonate in a way from your perspective, right? In your organization, your campus? How do you perceive IAM? I don't know if anybody went to Kevin's Kevin's presentation yesterday. He mentioned at the top a story about folks used to complain IT sucks, right? How does everybody feel now about campus IT, IAM, talking about internal support? Brave souls, volunteers. So we'll go here.
So Brian with GW. So we've been on a long journey with our IAM to get to more of an enterprise solution. Came from custom built and things over the years, pride of ownership within the team, to really establishing a strong platform for governance and a place to build from into the future. One of the things that continues to trip us up has been around the definition of roles. We've heard the conversation around the community and what do you mean by community, and what does it mean to be part of that community for your institution, and when you're dealing with research and education, and when you're dealing with services for faculty that might not be paid by your institution but are teaching at your institution but paid somewhere else, and how they're seen within their platform. there's so many permutations that come out of that the guidance in that space is really hard, because people have guidance for role-based access, but it's not about our ecosystem and where we live on a daily basis. I think we've nailed the value proposition around it, right? Easier access to the services, seamless authentication again across the different services, visiting faculty coming in and being able to get started quickly, right? But that's very much at I got in the door and I can get to the thing I need, but the true life cycling of our services and the ability to add and remove services based on your roles within an organization. The real complex things are the harder topics with our community. So I think we've done a great job, and InCommon and the tier infrastructure has been a huge part of that journey, but it's still just at the surface level for what we could be doing with it. And when you get down into the hard problems, and you get we're unique, everybody here is unique, I know your institution's unique, but we're grappling with that same struggle within that community space. And so I think getting into that area of our role definitions and how do we really instantiate that through the platforms, and if we're going to do true attestation, across all of our platforms, what does that really look like? And so that part of the conversation for me is the harder one in our group.
Yeah, I feel like that is something that we've all been grappling with for a long time, and we know is out there. And even as campuses move to more commercial offerings or are reinventing it, it just keeps not being solved. Especially because I left central IT and I work distributed now, so I see it even more how we were conscious of that problem in central, but when you get the one step out, it's even more like there's absolutely no idea how complicated it is, the relationships there, the faculty that are teaching that aren't actually faculty here, or supervising employees when they don't work for us. Very complicated relationships. It almost feels like an advocacy situation, which maybe would be more like the special interest group or whatever, but managing those roles, yeah. Is there somebody else over there? I can't see Albert.
No.
I just put to that working with your talk special interest group isn't not in practice. It is your HR, it is your faculty affairs, it is those other groups that need to understand that when they're managing their platform, how does that affect your activity?
Yeah.
So hello. Sorry for my voice. Maarten Kremers from SURF, Research and Education Network in the Netherlands. I was triggered also by the words of institution values and recent explosion of commercial offerings. What we now talking to in the Netherlands with our institutions is the debate of public values, that you want to have values, offerings that are in line with your own values. And on one hand, you want to have, for instance, open source offerings, or at least offerings where you're not, you have good transition and no vendor lock-in. On the other hand, we see also the effect that, especially for IAM, Microsoft and other cloud vendors offer them at a very cheap price, and then in the end, the cheap offering, the commercial offering wins it, because hey, it's cheap. And especially for instance, the Microsoft case, it does work excellent for what I would call the campus use cases, where you have a few services which you can use, like HR, like student information systems, but which are definitely not always compatible with the work we do in R&E, stuff like multilateral federations, but also the values we have in R&E. And I was wondering, I know that this is the case in the Netherlands. I was wondering what the opinion of you is, or the people in the room here, how this delicate balance between, on one hand, commercial offerings which are cheap, and on the other hand, you still want to provide the offering also to your researchers by having multilateral federations offered. How is that tension here in the US further? Because that triggered me.
I think something Kevin said yesterday, there's an interesting opportunity, and I hadn't thought about this until Kevin's presentation, but we did start doing this originally for the researchers and the scholarship, and many of us, I certainly count myself in there, maybe lost focus on that and started thinking about we were solving the logging into Office 365. Of course, we didn't have Office 365 then, but we started thinking of that as the focus rather than the other side of it. And so it's an interesting opportunity to step and look back at that and say, oh, should we really be over there? Is it okay that we lose the giant numbers, right? We all tout the numbers of logins we get, but really most of those are to email. And think instead about we need quality for our researchers, for the scholarship, for the educators. The learning management maybe dances that line a bit more, because certainly there's millions of logins there. And how we do that, I think, is a great opportunity, and that's where we can step back to our values, which is certainly something I'm interested in, and making sure we do keep it open and so forth. Do try to use the microphones. The session is being recorded. I have absolutely no idea what will happen to the recording, or if it'll be very thrilling television, but.
So Martin, to your question, there is going to need to be a multi-pronged approach to overcome that gap, right? The vendor partners that provide solutions that solve parts of our problems, they have their own set of incentives about what to focus on, right? But at the same time, the higher education institutions, top research institutions, the addressable market there is huge, right? So there's a real opportunity for that gap to be bridged if we can communicate to vendors that our requirements are actually satisfiable provided an interested and willing partner, right? And there's a lot of homework that has to be done there. I would argue that there's clarity that we owe to parties that are interested in playing in this space, so that we can truly enumerate our requirements and maybe even reassure them that even though we always keep saying that, oh, of course, our institution is unique, everything is unique, right? But there are, in fact, some commonalities. And we should strive for a world where there are more commonalities. Oh, perhaps that is why certain things are named the way they are. If we keep working on more guidance, more policy guidance, more best practices guidance, I think over time we can really achieve progress towards commonality by leveraging institutions' own willingness to adopt best practices if those best practices are published by groups that they trust. So I think over time this problem will get better. We just have to commit to pursuing it. Similarly, we can try to provide that clarity with vendors, and there's multiple avenues that we can do that. I think the Net Plus program is one of the ways, certainly not the only way. Maybe it's one of the more direct ways with a lot of benefits, but there are other ways we can sustain that dialogue by really communicating our requirements. And additionally, oftentimes we find that even though we all know that identity should be a practice, We all know that our institutions are at various levels of adopting that and living in that reality. So oftentimes, purchasing decisions for identity management touching services are made without the notion that you're advancing academic mission. Oftentimes it is simply just thankless technology spending, down in those T's in the graph where we got to buy this, let's go with the cheapest, right? There's really a vast degree to which certain solutions really enable that research mission, that very high value research mission. And if we can bridge that understanding, and part of that occurs on our campuses, if we can bridge that understanding, then maybe we will see more of an appetite to be to not go for bargain basement solutions, but actually go for something that really hits our requirements.
I'm going to hijack the mic because I have a question. Go ahead.
No, I was going to, on that, is it stopping thinking about us as a cost center and instead as, I don't know, what was the alternative to that, my brain? But yeah, we're helping drive the innovation rather than being a cost the university has to bear. Like, my worn out analogy, of course, is that, asking IT what to do is like asking the typewriter what to write. But if we change is it changing our thinking on that or other people's thinking on that, or?
Yes.
Yes, all right.
So my question is actually what and how, right? So I've heard so far the notion that IAM is a practice, right? It's more than technology. It is a practice, one dare say a business function, critical institutional function. IAM is supposed, at least in higher education, IAM is supposed to enable the mission of the academy, right? We heard research. And I think we have sort of collective this presumption that research belongs in large research-heavy R1 universities. There's also the notion of providing equitable access, maximum access to scholarly interaction, which should not be included, should not be sort of contained in large R1 universities. And it's also not just researchers with PhDs. It's students, even freshmen, maybe high school students. So what is our mission? Right? When we talk about how to communicate this to ourselves and to others, what are we communicating? I heard earlier also, access control-wise, we're all different. Show of your hand if you do not believe that's the case. So when it comes to access control, managing access on the campus, that we are all, each campus is different, right? Okay. So what I'm kind of hearing is we share a common mission, I think, but we need to do it differently. Maybe. I see Tom Jordan kind of doing this. So where do we go from that?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Charisse. I'm with Unicon, so a little bit of a vendor perspective, but listening to everything is so valuable. But the first thing I think of is Futures 2 is out there to really provide, in my eyes, like a foundation. Internet 2, all of you as members and contributors coming together and really talking about what your needs are and sharing the differences and the commonalities. They're providing a framework of how can we help And to me, it's like, it's awesome because it's bringing you all together to have these discussions. And the biggest thing that comes to my mind is, you are the few and there's so many, many more. Is there not an understanding of the value of what this really is and what you're doing even in this session? Right? Because there's nothing wrong. It's all goodness, and everything that everybody's saying is so valid, but it is the few for so many. It reminds me of some of the great, calls, the working groups and the calls that they have across the community. And there are a lot of people that will show up, a lot, that's all relative, people that will show up, but contribution from time to time is pretty slim, right? The same core people are active contributors and participants, and that's wonderful because you get people to do that, like all of you here, which I think is fantastic. But just as you said, there's going to be nuances and there's going to be similarities, and I think one of the things that I would like to see is really more participants, right? Oh, it's okay, it's a safe place to really share, even if you're not sure exactly what you need to share, right? But the more participation you get, the more understanding of those similarities and those differences and how they all have value. And then back to really what the goal is, how can you really accept this external help, which is really part of, higher education and research and scholarship and learning in general. So it kind of, anyways, my 2 cents.
Yeah, so my thought was this, right? And there's a assumption here that we all agree we share the common mission. So that might be the first thing we want to re-examine. Do we actually agree what is the mission we are trying to achieve? I think we are also in agreement that there's a lot of differences and a lot of pieces, right? But if we agree on a common mission, I think the differences are the how problem, not the if problem, right? Someone this week mentioned JFK, might have been Kevin, right, in JFK's speech about going to the moon. It was JFK, right, Kevin, right? The difference between we are going to the moon versus we might go to the moon. Right? If we have the same mission, we set our minds to we are going to achieve this. The rest of it, while difficult, it becomes a how do we figure it out problem, right?
What is that moon? Tom, do you have an opinion? Where's the moon?
Oh, yeah. So as I'm listening to the discussion, I recall at the beginning of the TIER project, there was a concerted effort to gather requirements and several different campus visits and pulling people together to develop a list of requirements that the now TAP software needed to be able to meet to satisfy campus requirements. And I'm super interested to think about, like, what if we dusted that off and looked at it through the lens of program competencies to be able to say these are things that a higher ed IM practice needs to be able to do, and then look through the lens of seeing where those things are covered through outsourced or commercial options and where they are not, and seeing what the differential is that the community needs to focus on. Obviously, there are things that need to be refreshed in that space, but we may already have a body of work that helps point us to those competencies and gives us a framework to evaluate which of those competencies are utility and easily met through the market, and which of those require community effort for more novel solutions. Just a thought of one way that we might move forward on, like, the competency and/or practice angle of things.
Mike Rady, UNICON, also a member of the CTAB committee. One thing I think we've gotten away from in terms of communicating best practices around, and that I see as a consistent concern that, one of the things, and working at a vendor I get to do is work with lots of different institutions and see what's happening with identity operations within lots of different institutions, is governance and policy and promulgating best practices around that. I remember back in the early days of the original camps between InCommon and EDUCAUSE, where various models of governance were discussed. And I can't recall having seen that, and maybe it's just me and I'm missing it, as a community talking about that more. And there's no institution I work with that feels they really have that governance around identity as a solved problem. Now, part of that may be that if you come to us for help, you know things aren't exactly where you want them, and those who have it completely solved, we never see. So maybe that's part of the answer there. The other thing on policy is I see problems on two sides of that. One is institutions that have policies in place around various, you will take these training classes to be in compliance, and if not, you don't have access. But nobody's actually enforcing those, at least not in an automated fashion, or do I rarely see any automated compliance enforcement. The other side of the coin is I see institutions where people are wanting technology and the identity team to substitute for some aspect of operations where it actually should be taken care of by policy and personal responsibility, like in the management of sponsored accounts, for one thing, where the identity team had to personally approve everyone because they weren't, the institution wasn't willing to say that the person actually sponsoring the account had that responsibility to ensure that it was within the realm, within the guidelines of policy in the first place. And I think as a community, we need to step back and look at that governance policy and process a little bit more and make best practices available to and communicate and market best practices out to the community. I think that will be a key. Obviously, that's going to be a key aspect if we dive back into really pushing for identity assurance. It's the whole process around how identities come into an institution are managed over time that are a key aspect of that. So I think that's an area that we need to go back and we've done lots of great things with technology, and that's good. But we need to step back and look at the picture in a little broader fashion as a community, I think now. The other area, and Kevin mentioned this in talking about the Futures 2 report, is marketing and communications. I think as an organization, as a community, I think we need to do a better job of that with all of the member institutions. But we also need to provide the identity folks within each institution with the materials to do that within their own institutions. I think that's a key, again, that's a key missing piece of an institution even realizing what all identity services and expertise is available to them to then do a better job in the first place.
I have a question to follow up to that. So, in part because we mentioned this is a CTAP hosted session, and I know there are several folks here who are new to our community. Community and Trust Insurance Board is the group that is the steward and caretaker behind the baseline expectations policy for InCommon Federation. So these are the policy folks. So question is, do you think CTAP should go down that route and curate, develop this level of policy? So far, CTAP has focused purely on federation, inter-organization federation policies. Okay. Is that something CTAP should do? And if not, well, is that something InCommon should do? And if so, how do we go about doing that?
That's an invitation for anyone to say.
Yes? No? Need it? Okay. Oh.
Mike, could I just follow up a bit? You noted a gap, as it were, in institutions' governance and coherent policies surrounding identities. And you alluded to recent work on assurance, trying to formalize the notion of an identity assurance as something useful to contribute to policies and governance. Do you have some other notion of what role InCommon might play in assisting institutions to address those governance gaps? You're okay.
Well, I think one thing would be, given its relationship, InCommon's relationship with so many disparate organizations and institutions, would be to gather input on what all models various institutions have, particularly, what institutions feel they have a pretty good handle on that. And so here are models, here's a range of models that are in place that, this type of organization or this type of institution, whether it's by size, complexity, R1, R2 versus, a four-year liberal arts or a community college or whatever, find that work or don't work. And what, so I think there's an information gathering role they can do, and then put that information into a usable form to communicate back out. I think that's one aspect that
Okay.
we could do.
And then Kevin.
Yeah, how you doing? Corey Lee, Microsoft. I have to second that point just in regards to the value of where I think the InCommon community can really drive clarity. I think, to the point made about the broad spectrum of identity use cases and scenarios that exist in education, everything from alumni account management to student onboarding to, library management scenarios, research enablement, like the number of use cases and identity personas tends to kind of, it can run off a page, but, what would be super helpful would be the clarity around what are those common models to handle those scenarios from an identity perspective, and then how does that handling translate to assurance-based scenarios that support security objectives and that trust model that result in enabling institutions as a whole to obviously do what they do best, but maintaining that core fabric of trust, identity, access, et cetera. So at least from my perspective, I think there's a huge value add to being able to drive clarity in that space, but then also, as was described, how do institutions communicate those things similarly to their leadership? Because from my vantage point, I've seen, you're only as good as the person who understands the problem space and can communicate it to leadership. So if there's an issue with being able to strategically relay the why behind doing things and how, there's a gap in communication. So I definitely think those are just two observations.
Is it my turn, Albert? I'm compelled to change my name because I didn't know you were listening yesterday. You keep saying Kevin said. So a very long time ago when I first started working at Penn State, there was a provost there, and he was generally regarded to be a really exceptional academic leader, and he left Penn State to go run a massive foundation, and he came back to campus, and I remember listening to him give a talk, and he said he went from Penn State's a big place, but he said he went from an environment that was resource constrained, and I had to provide leadership in a resource constrained environment, and then I went to a foundation, and I had literally billions of dollars, and it was a very different problem, and it was in some ways a more difficult problem to have, the problem of abundance, but to have so many problems to try to address and solve. And as I'm listening to you all, I'm reminded of him and that switch. He went from resource constraint to resource abundance, but now I'm going to go back to constraint. So some of you did, see some of the slides yesterday. If you follow the premise that there are 771 metadata publishing organizations in InCommon, and roughly speaking, they spend $300,000 a year annually on IAM, which is very conservative. That's $231 million. Very conservative. Through your InCommon participation fees, you generate less than $7 million, and it's 3%. So in the collective, you've created 3% of the aggregate spend to try and address an incredibly large number of diverse problems. So as I'm listening to you, I'm trying to think, how do you take 3% of the aggregate spend and apply it in such a way that begins to ease this pain? And I don't know the answer to it, but I want to share that thought with you, because that's a very significant problem, and at some level, that's what it deduces down to. A very small percentage of money in the aggregate to begin to address some of these issues. And I can't emphasize some enough. We don't have enough capital to do it all, not even close. We're going to have to be, the art of doing the Futures 2 project is going to be picking the right things. And that's really, really hard, which is why this conversation, I was glad David had organized it. That's why this conversation and many subsequent ones are going to be super important, because we're going to have to aim really well and be courageous in doing so.
Thank you, Kevin.
Suck all the air out of the room. That's my job.
With that, yeah, we have 2 minutes left, so we didn't manage to spend the whole time sitting here staring at each other, which is good.
I said Gene could take us out with singing if you wanted.
I'll lean over here away from the microphone.
So a quick plug, this is way advanced in December. If you are new to this format of discussion and you think there should be more, there is a place for that in December at TechX in Boston. During TechX, we do hold what we call an advanced camp or A camp, where everybody like this gets in the room and figure things out. Lots of rooms. I promise smaller rooms where people actually look at each other rather than look up on the giant screen.
We do have nice big giant screens in here, though, as opposed
Big screens
to
are nice, yes.
Postage stamp we sometimes get there.
Anyway, I want to thank our co-chairs, CTAP co-chairs, and I want to thank everybody for coming and for your thoughts. Thank you.